Welcome to the General Counselling podcast. As always, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you. At Montresor Legal, our best intelligence comes from bringing together our private practice and in-house networks. That is what the General Counselling podcast is all about. A leader from business with a law firm partner sharing their insights on the latest issues across the legal landscape. We've got some brilliant episodes coming up on mental health and well-being, structured finance and private equity. So hit subscribe, and if you're feeling very warm-hearted, why not leave us a review or spread the word on LinkedIn. In today's episode, we're covering life sciences, an industry we're all heaping rather a lot of expectation on at the moment, in which the UK plays a leading role and has the odd legal issue or two. So I couldn't be more excited about my two guests, both emerging leaders in the life sciences legal industry. From business, we have Zoe Kimberly. A litigator by training, practicing in London and Sydney, Zoe has spent coming up to a decade in the life sciences industry, initially with Abbott and more recently at US pharmaceutical giant AbbVie as legal director for the UK and Ireland and area counsel for Southern and Central Europe. From private practice, we have Sarah Cowlishaw, a regulatory and commercial partner from the Life Sciences Group at Covington Burling. Covington have built a Tier 1 rated life sciences practice here in London, the only US headquartered firm to manage that. Sarah has been recognised by the Legal 500 as a next generation partner in life sciences and healthcare and made the Lawyer Magazine's Hot 100 list in January this year. Welcome to you both. Thanks so much for joining. We'll spend the next 30 minutes or so getting Zoe and Sarah's insights on what's happening in the most important industry to pretty much everyone on the planet right now. And where else should we start but good old COVID? Sarah, what do you see as the main impact of 2020 on lawyers in practice?
Well, I think the transition to working remotely has definitely been a learning curve. For me, and I'm sure for a lot of private practice lawyers, the historical remote working, I didn't personally do remote working. I worked exclusively in the office. So, the initial sort of transition to actually working from home involved me having to designate a working space, buy a screen, get a printer, do all the usual requirements to get a home office set up. And I'm sure I wasn't alone in that kind of initial phase transition period. Once I did that, I think obviously it became much easier, and it's been very easy actually to adapt to working from home. But I think one of the big changes in private practice has actually been the introduction of Teams and Zoom conference facilities. Before this year, lots of my client calls would have been held over teleconference. So obviously you wouldn't be able to see your clients, you just hear their voice and have a conversation. Obviously you would be seeing them much more in person, but the sort of day-to-day calls would be done over teleconference. Introductions of Zoom and Teams has made the personal dynamics much easier to replicate. And it's made it much easier to kind of have personal relationships and continue to connect face-to-face, even though not in person. I think the current environment is definitely most challenging for junior lawyers who are yet to kind of establish their internal networking relationships and also their client relationships. And I do particularly feel for trainees who are starting this year without, ever having been into the office and ever having really met the colleagues that they're working with. Doing everything remotely, it does work well and it's working fine, but I think you obviously miss out on some of the more fun social elements that we historically would have been having. So I think it's very important that senior lawyers make sure that juniors are well connected and are having established touch points throughout the day so that you can mimic real life situations as much as possible.
I think, that's come up a lot on the podcast across every practice area, which is if you were a trainee, you used to sit with a senior lawyer, whether they're a partner or a senior associate, just literally hearing them on the phone, asking them questions, asking your colleagues or your cohort what they think of a particular issue. All of these guys don't have any of that. And I think, it's going to be interesting to see how in a few years' time that plays out to how they develop as lawyers when they become more senior. And my feeling is I imagine the really proactive ones will probably be great, but there will certainly be some people that are affected by it. Yeah. So the other area we've seen, which I guess is more on the in-house side, is what the impact of remote working's had on the ability to develop relationships once you're an in-house lawyer with your internal clients and with the business? How do you see, how's that been for you since April?
Yeah, so Tom, I think it's a mixed bag. I think when you work in a multinational, you're already fairly adept at some level of virtual working, particularly where you have a headquartered company overseas. So there's already a dynamic which involves video conferencing and Zoom. But I think what's changed is the intensity of that, certainly. And now, most meetings are being conducted virtually, as opposed to just some where perhaps it was an update or a really core topic. Everything now pretty much is online, as you would expect. And so it's really a new skill set. It's really a new skill set for all of us. I cover a fairly broad region of countries, so it was part of the remit already. But it does mean that interpersonal relationship has to be built in a different way, particularly if you don't know the individual at all or they're brand new. Then I think that does mean that a certain part of your interaction has to actually genuinely be around trying to get to know that individual, how they operate and their style, before you can even get into the core part of advising them and supporting them, because everybody's different. And interacting with somebody over Zoom or Teams is very different to actually being in person. But I think it has its upsides as well. I think it means that we are talking to each other very, very regularly. It does mean that if you are in a global network, it's become the norm. And so perhaps before, if somebody was in a room by themselves and joining by video conference to the US and they were the only person not in the room, they might not always feel as present. But I don't think you have that issue so much now. So I think that sort of presence feeling is very now ingrained. And then in terms of just ensuring, when you're having a difficult conversation with a client, obviously face-to-face is sometimes preferable in those sorts of situations. But it's really about building that trust, which you can do as well in a Teams or Zoom environment. But it's having that trust built up front, particularly if it's a new client or a very tricky issue, and using that basis to then ensure that they follow you on the journey of where the advice is going. I'd certainly also echo some of the things that Sarah said. If we've got new people joining the organisation, or indeed some of our more junior team members, losing that learning by osmosis is an obvious downside, but we've just had to make up for it. And we've done other things. We've had a quiz, happy hour, different sorts of conversations and meetings to try and mix it up a bit and keep it fun.
And the $1 million question for everyone at the moment is, but especially for our two life sciences experts, when are we going to get back to normal?
Well, I've been optimistic that things would be going back to normal quite quickly, but I've been somewhat proven wrong so far. So I'm not sure I'm the right person to necessarily ask. But I think hopefully early to mid next year we'll be back working in the office as we were. I think the definition of normal might have changed a little bit. I think work, travel, face-to-face meetings are unlikely to go back to exactly the way they were, as sort of by the middle of next year. I think it might take a little bit longer for everything to go back to historical normal. But I think we've learned a lot of positives about the technological advances, and the introduction of Zoom and team calls means that we've got some learnings that are going to make the transition and next year much easier.
Zoe, what are your thoughts?
I'm optimistic. I think you have to be. It's a difficult time. I'm going to try and avoid using the phrase "the new normal," but I've already said it. So I think it's made. No, I know. I think it's a question of just really making the best of the situation. Like Sarah, one really hopes that by next year things are in a different situation, depending upon the science and how things pan out with the vaccine programs, and generally how the world continues to deal with this pandemic. So I think the sooner the better. But I've certainly seen and heard of many silver linings coming out of this situation. It's that balancing act between, trying to make the best of it, but at the same time not getting too bogged down in the news and some of the very difficult stories.
And I think, as you both said, imagine if, everyone had always said we were well overdue a flu. And if this had happened 10 years ago, it would have been a different scenario in terms of how we would all been working together, because we wouldn't have had any of the technology we've had that has, albeit people are fed up with it to a certain degree, as you both said, it has made, we probably take it for granted a little bit how much of a difference it's made. Moving on to the life sciences market, Sarah, what do you think are the issues that are keeping general counsel and business leaders within the life science industry up at night at the moment?
So I think if you put COVID to one side, I think one of the other key issues is Brexit, which is obviously still a looming presence. From the life sciences perspective, and particularly from the regulatory perspective, the transitional period ends at the end of this year on 31st of December. And from January the 1st, the UK life sciences industry will essentially be a third country for the purposes of the medicines and medical device frameworks. Companies are obviously still trying to get to grips with what that's going to mean and have their Brexit-proof their regulatory infrastructures. And I think that's just challenging given the current climate we're in, but also given that we still don't really 100% know what our post-Brexit UK framework is going to look like.
Zoe, same question to you.
Yeah, back to the B word as well, Brexit. I think Brexit raises some very unique challenges for pharma. I think one of the big stories in the press, certainly last year, less so this year, was really focused on medicines shortages and the risk around that. That's obviously something that's been very, very well tackled by the industry here. And I think that continues to obviously be a topic that occupies companies and supply chain managers and the teams that support all of the ways that medicines are released and got to the patients, that being the priority. So I think that on a practical level is certainly something that comes out of Brexit. But I think also you've got the change in the legislation landscape, what that means from a regulatory point of view. We've got reform and new processes now that the MHRA is going to be able to support, which actually brings some really great opportunity as well in the UK, looking at innovative treatments and different pathways for access. So I think Brexit brings challenges, but also certainly some new opportunities as well.
Both generally, and it sounds like lots of opportunities for law firms operating within the space for being able to advise clients on the area. Perfect. The other area that we like to cover on the General Counselling podcast is careers advice, and we ask the person who's coming from the law firm world to give some advice to people from the other side of the fence and vice versa. So Sarah, in your view, what makes a great in-house lawyer within life sciences?
So I think one of the key traits of a great in-house lawyer is someone who can issue spots. So I've done a number of client secondments, and what I always found interesting when I was on the client side was just how many issues that are kind of brought to the legal team that aren't actually legal issues, and sort of trying to triage those issues and work out which one is actually for the legal team and which one's for finance or some of the business departments. So that's definitely a key skill. I also think one of the key traits is obviously understanding your client's business and being able to explain the client's commercial priorities. That's equally important for us as private practice lawyers, but I think it's even more so for in-house lawyers who are living their client's world on a day-to-day basis. And then just from a personal perspective, I think a great in-house lawyer is someone who can act as the bridge between their commercial client and then us as private practice to triage those legal issues and to get us involved at the appropriate time to help with matters.
I think that's especially in the pharmaceuticals industry, which is by its very nature a really techie industry. So how did you find when you first moved in there, having to keep up with some of the more medically and scientifically minded types?
Yeah, that was one of the fascinating parts of it, and one of the reasons why I went in-house in the first place. It would certainly help to have, some sort of medical background to decipher some of the more complicated terms. But you learn as you go, and we have, certainly I've had the benefit of some exceptional colleagues and mentors to learn from. But I do think, one of the really, really important elements in-house is knowing your product and knowing your business. I know that sounds really, really simple, but it is, the cornerstone of ensuring that you're able to advise effectively. And the way that I frequently think of, myself and how best to really support the business is being a strategic advisor with legal expertise. So in some cases, the legal expertise part is secondary to really that strategic thinking, and that's a change. And so knowing the products and the business, particularly given the complexity of the industry, is critical.
And on the other side of the fence, if you're looking at a partner that you love working with, or someone as an external counsel, what are the attributes that they have that make them a joy to work with?
I think the litmus test is being in a room with three of your most important business leaders, and them seeing you as the joined up legal team. So not seeing you as the internal lawyer and the partner from the law firm being the external counsel, really seeing you as literally a partnership to be able to give not only the business advice, but the really complex and necessary support from an external counsel perspective. So it's having that comfort and that knowledge that the team is very much combined as opposed to playing different roles. We obviously, in-house and external counsel have different roles to play and different strengths. But I think it's how the client sees it. That for me is really very important.
And is that about the relationship you, I guess, build with them? Because it must be quite difficult to do that in the first time you work with a particular firm or a particular partner.
Yeah, certainly. I think you build up. I've used the word trust already once, but I think trust is really, really important, and knowledge. And sometimes some of the issues that we're working on, take years to address, and so you are literally taking the business on this journey of the advice. So it can take time, but then equally, if you're thrust into a really, really urgent and tricky matter, you can then spend a very intense period of time working with a partner, and that can be as as beneficial and as useful to the relationship as being any sort of long-term project.
Okay. And so you both are sort of shining examples to junior lawyers coming through of what you can achieve if you want to gun for partnership, or if you want to move into the in-house world. What's the best bit of careers advice you've ever had, and who gave it to you, Zoe?
This is a really tricky question because I've had the benefit of working with some exceptional lawyers over my career. I think one of the really, really obvious things that I learned fairly early on was to listen and really take into consideration and really take into account what somebody was saying, as opposed to, I think as lawyers, we tend to be quite analytical, so perhaps we're already at the answer before we've even heard the full extent of the question, and that's a good thing. That's a great trait. Some of the people that I work with love the fact that I've already thought of the answer before I've actually been asked the question. But I think it cuts both ways. I think it's really important to listen, and also another thing which I think is useful for in-house is take your time. Because quite often in-house, you are under significant pressure because your clients are sitting all around you. Unfortunately, you don't have the benefit of a separate office. So I think it's really making sure that you take the time and the opportunity that you need to sort something out,
I think that's really relevant. I think lawyers generally are some that we speak to feel a pressure to put out that they know the answer to everything, and so that point about listening and not necessarily bowing to the pressure that you know the answer and giving it straight off the bat is a challenge and a discipline in itself. So, Sarah, from your perspective, what do you think is the best bit of advice you've had, and who gave it to you?
I think actually the best bit of advice I got was probably from my mum. And she always told me when I was sort of growing up that make sure you work to live and not live to work. And I think it's really important that you remember that and to balance priorities correctly, particularly on the sort of path up to partnership, where work can sometimes be quite all-consuming. And particularly also this year, where the home life and work life has become increasingly blurred. Just to remember to try and take time for yourself and do things outside of work as well that keeps you happy. That's
the first mum advice we've had, but I think actually, really enough, if I was going to do the same thing for me, I'm pretty sure some of my mother's early careers advice would probably have featured reasonably high on my list of best bits of advice I've had from people.
Wise words, I'd say.
Listen to your mother is the best advice from the podcast today. But so the last topic we go on with guests on general counselling is we ask everyone to think about their GOAT lawyer. So for those of you uninitiated with sporting and acronyms, GOAT stands for the greatest of all time. And the way we look at this is it could be anyone, real or fictional, alive or dead. We've had everyone from Clarence Darrow to the guy from My Cousin Vinny through to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So there's been a reasonable range of GOATs that we've had on the General Counselling podcast. Sarah, first question to you.
So I actually think this is a really tricky question. And I suppose mine's more of a personal one. It's not necessarily the greatest of all time lawyer, but it's my personal inspirational lawyer. So we have a personal family friend who was a lawyer. I think he was the reason I took an interest in the profession from an early age. And he sort of inspired me to where I am now. So I think that would be my GOAT for this purposes.
Perfect. Zoe.
Yeah, I can't choose my answer to this because there are a couple. One of the reasons why I went into law was partly due to the television series This Life, so I'm now showing my age. And funnily enough, Andrew Lincoln, who played Egg in the series, I saw him in a beach car park in the summer in Cornwall. He was clearly going off surfing with his family. And I really wanted to go and say to him, you know, this was really a defining moment in my career choice. But I think on a serious note, I think, like I said earlier, I've been incredibly lucky to be mentored and have some fantastic role models, in my career. But I would say that somebody that particularly struck me when I was studying and even before then was Lord Denning, an extremely progressive judge of his time. And when I was 13, I met him in person, and he said to me, so, what do you want to do, later on in your career? And I said, well, I want to be a lawyer. And he looked at me very, very seriously and said, well, why on earth would you want to do that? And I took that as a sign of his overriding sense of humour, which came out in his judgments and his support, for the average Joe, which I think at the time that he was practicing was really quite unique. And also support for women as well in some of his judgments. So I would say it's a combination of Egg from This Life and Lord Denning, which is a strange one, but there we are.
That is Lord Denning's second nomination as a GOAT lawyer. So he obviously made an impact significantly, and I think especially in relation to some of the Supreme Court stuff that's going on at the moment, I think he is someone that obviously made an impact on a lot of lawyers from the sort of generation, I guess, growing up in the 90s. And we'll probably select him rather than Egg on the basis that actual Andrew Lincoln isn't the lawyer, although Egg is. Excellent choices. I think that's the first time we've had a repeat nominee. And I still think Joe Pesci from My Cousin Vinny's out in the front, but that'll certainly give him something to think about. Perfect. That is it. All that's left for me to say really is thank you so much to both our guests, AbbVie Zoe Kimberly and Covington Sarah Cowlishaw, for both your time and your insight. I hope you'll both join us again, hopefully to tell us a story how AbbVie's coronavirus saved humanity. Thanks everyone for listening. Remember, hit subscribe, do spread the word on LinkedIn, and I will see you on the next episode.